Welcome back to another episode where we unravel the mysteries behind literature's most iconic figures. Today, we're delving deep into one of Gothic horror's most misunderstood characters, the creature from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Before we begin this journey into the dark laboratories and frozen Arctic wastes, if you're fascinated by the darker corners of literature and history, make sure to subscribe and follow the channel. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this one. Now, let's step into the world of Victor Frankenstein and his creation. Our story begins not in a castle laboratory, but in a villa beside Lake Geneva during the summer of 1816. That year was unseasonably cold. Volcanic ash from Mount Tambora had darkened skies across Europe, creating what historians now call the year without a summer. Confined indoors, an 18-year-old Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, not yet Mary Shelley, found herself in remarkable company. Her lover Percy Bushes Shelley, Lord Byron, and Byron's physician, John Polidori. To pass the long, storm-darkened nights, Byron proposed a challenge. Each guest would write a ghost story. While the others struggled or abandoned their attempts, Mary's imagination gave rise to something far more unsettling than a conventional specter. Her idea would transcend the ghost story entirely. Published anonymously in 1818 and later under her own name in 1823, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, introduced the world to Victor Frankenstein and his nameless creation, a being that would unsettle readers for generations and challenge fundamental assumptions about life, death, and what it means to be human. To understand this fascinating yet terrifying monster, we must first understand the man who brought him into being. Our story doesn't begin with the creature, but with his creator, Victor Frankenstein, a young student of natural philosophy, obsessed with the secrets of life itself. At the University of Ingolstadt in Germany, Victor became consumed by a singular question. Could death be conquered? Could life be generated from lifeless matter? For nearly 2 years, Victor labored in secret. He haunted charnel houses, dissecting rooms and slaughterhouses. He worked in a solitary chamber at the top of his house, separated from all other apartments by a staircase. The work was disgusting. Victor himself admits that his labor disturbed the infinite minuteness of the causes, and that he kept his workshop a solitary chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house. Victor chose to construct a being of gigantic stature, about 8 feet in height and proportionally large. Why? Because, as he explains in Chapter 4, the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed. The smaller and more delicate the components, the more difficult and time-consuming the work. So Victor opted for size, believing it would expedite his task. It was on a dreary night of November that Victor beheld the accomplishment of his toils. Shelley provides us with Victor's exact description in Chapter 5 as, "His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful." Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. This was no resurrection of a single corpse. The creature was assembled from multiple sources, a patchwork being stitched together from the dead. Victor had selected each component for its beauty, yet the result was catastrophic. The animation process itself remains mysterious. Shelley deliberately keeps it vague, mentioning in Chapter 4 only that Victor had discovered the cause of generation in life and became capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. When the creature's eyes opened and it breathed, taking its first gasping breath, Victor was immediately filled with horror and disgust. The being he had worked for nearly 2 years to create now seemed abhorrent to him. That night, Victor's sleep was troubled by wild and unsettling dreams, and upon waking, he found the creature standing by his bed. Its watery eyes met his, and it reached out a hand toward him. Terrified, Victor fled the apartment. What happened to the creature in those first hours? This is where we must piece together the story from what the creature himself later reveals. When Victor abandoned his creation, the creature was left in a state of complete confusion. He did not understand the sensations overwhelming him. Sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell all flooded his consciousness simultaneously. In Chapter 11, as the creature later recounts to Victor, "It is with considerable difficulty that I remember the original era of my being. All the events of that period appear confused and indistinct." The creature's first memories were of a confused sensory experience. Light oppressed his eyes, and he was forced to shut them. Darkness came, and he feared, but presently he found that by the faculty of sight, he was slowly comprehending the objects around him. He perceived the boundaries of radiant light receding from him, and soon discovered that he could wander freely. The creature felt cold and hungry, basic sensations he couldn't yet name or understand. He left Victor's apartment, descending the stairs and finding his way into the streets of Ingolstadt, and from there into the open country. The creature's escape, if we can call it that, was not a dramatic prison break, but rather the stumbling flight of a newborn consciousness thrust into an incomprehensible world. There were no locked doors, no guards, only abandonment. What happened next is pieced together from the creature's own narrative in chapters 11 through 16, where Shelley gives him voice, and what a voice it is. The creature's account of his early existence is one of the most poignant sections of the novel. Disoriented and alone, the creature left Frankenstein's apartment and wandered into the streets of Ingolstadt. His first experiences were purely sensory. In chapter 11, he describes, "It is with considerable difficulty that I remember the original era of my being. All the events of that period appear confused and indistinct. A strange multiplicity of sensations seized me, and I saw, felt, heard, and smelt at the same time. Light overwhelmed him. Sound confused him. He didn't understand the basic mechanics of his own senses. He wandered into a forest near Ingolstadt, where he spent his first days learning to distinguish between his senses, discovering hunger and thirst, understanding the difference between moonlight and sunlight. The creature's intellectual development was remarkably rapid. He learned that fire gave warmth, but also burned. He discovered that certain berries satisfied his hunger, while others did not. He learned to distinguish bird songs and the rustling of leaves. But more painfully, he began to understand his own solitude. His first encounter with humans ended in violence against him. When he wandered into a village seeking shelter and perhaps companionship, the villagers attacked him. In chapter 11, he recalls, "The whole village was roused. Some fled, some attacked me, until, grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons, I escaped to the open country." This pattern would repeat itself. Every human who saw him responded with immediate terror and aggression. The creature learned a bitter lesson. His appearance condemned him before he could speak a word. He fled civilization and found refuge in a hovel, a lean-to structure attached to a cottage. This hovel, barely large enough for him to lie down in, would become his home and his classroom for many months. Through a small chink in the wall of his hovel, the creature could observe the cottage's inhabitants, an elderly blind man named Lacey, his son Felix, and his daughter Agatha. Later, they were joined by Safi, an Arabian woman whom Felix loved. For months, the creature watched them. He noticed their poverty, their kindness to each other, their sadness. Without their knowledge, he helped them, gathering firewood during the night and clearing snow from their path. But most importantly, he learned language. Shelley provides a detailed account of this process across chapters 12 and 13. The creature didn't just learn words, he learned the concepts behind them. He learned the names of objects first: fire, milk, bread, wood. Then he learned the family members' names. He discovered that Felix, Agatha, and the old man used certain sounds to denote the objects of their discourse. Gradually, over months of careful observation and practice, he taught himself their language. The arrival of Safi accelerated his education. Felix taught her French using François de Salignac de la Mothe Fenelon's Ruins of Empires, and the creature learned alongside her. Through this text and their conversations, he learned about human history, about governments, about the rise and fall of civilizations. He also learned about human values and emotions through books. He discovered 3 texts that profoundly shaped his understanding: Plutarch's Lives, Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, and most significantly, John Milton's Paradise Lost. These books became the creature's window into human nature, philosophy, and morality. Plutarch's Lives taught him about heroes and historical figures. The Sorrows of Young Werther introduced him to refined emotions and the concept of romantic love. But it was Paradise Lost that affected him most deeply. He identified with Adam, the first creation, but also with Satan, the outcast. He states in chapter 15, "Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me." This passage is crucial to understanding the creature's transformation. He was not created evil. He was created innocent, with a capacity for great goodness. But his experiences, rejection, isolation, and the constant cruelty of those who judged him solely by his appearance began to curdle that innocence into bitterness. After months of observation and education, the creature made a calculated decision. He would reveal himself to the Lacey family, but carefully. He waited for a day when the old man was alone, knowing that Lacey's blindness meant he would not judge by appearance. The encounter described in chapter 15 began promisingly. The creature approached the cottage, entered, and spoke to Lacey. The old man was kind, welcoming even. They conversed about loneliness and exile. Lacey offered to help this stranger. For a brief, shining moment, the creature experienced acceptance. Then Felix, Agatha, and Safie returned. Shelley describes the moment with devastating brevity in chapter 15. At that instant, the cottage door was opened, and Felix, Safie, and Agatha entered. Who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me? Agatha fainted, and Safie, unable to attend to her friend, rushed out of the cottage. Felix darted forward, and with supernatural force tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung. In a transport of fury, he dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. The creature fled. He had been prepared for questions, perhaps even for initial fear. But the immediate, violent rejection from the family he had protected and loved, though they never knew it, broke something fundamental within him. That night, hiding in the woods, the creature underwent a psychological transformation. The being who had wept over the sorrows of young Werther and aspired to the virtues described in Plutarch now embraced a darker philosophy. In chapter 16, he declares, "I could with pleasure have destroyed the cottage and its inhabitants, and have glutted myself with their shrieks and misery." He didn't act on this impulse immediately. Instead, he waited, hoping the family might return, hoping for another chance. But they never came back. They abandoned the cottage, fleeing the area entirely because of him. Now truly alone and with his last hope of companionship destroyed, the creature made a decision. He would seek out his creator, Victor Frankenstein. He would demand an accounting for why he had been brought into existence, only to be abandoned and despised. The creature's journey to find Victor took him eventually to Geneva. Along the way, he had one more crucial encounter. He saved a young girl from drowning in a river. This act of heroism, described in chapter 16, was rewarded not with gratitude but with violence. I had hardly placed her upon the ground when she was snatched from me by a man who rushed towards me. He aimed a gun, which he carried, at my body and fired. This final rejection completed the creature's transformation. He states, "The feelings of kindness and gentleness which I had entertained but a few moments before gave place to hellish rage and gnashing of teeth. Inflamed by pain, I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind." Near Geneva, the creature encountered a young boy in the woods. He thought perhaps a child, not yet taught to fear based on appearance, might become his companion. But when he grabbed the boy, the child screamed and struggled. When the boy revealed he was William Frankenstein, the younger brother of Victor, the creature's rage exploded, realizing that the boy is akin to his enemy. So the creature strangled the child. This was the creature's first murder, and it was both calculated revenge and an expression of his overwhelming rage and despair. He took a locket from William's body containing a portrait of Caroline Frankenstein, Victor's mother, and later planted it on Justine Moritz, a servant in the Frankenstein household, who would be executed for William's murder. Victor, devastated by his brother's death and Justine's execution, retreated to the mountains seeking solace. There, on the Mer de Glace, the sea of ice, a glacier near Chamonix, he encountered his creation for the first time since that night of abandonment. The creature approached across the ice with superhuman speed and agility. Victor called him devil and vile insect, threatening to crush him. But the creature responded not with violence, but with eloquence. In one of the most powerful speeches in the novel, the creature pleaded, "All men hate the wretched. How then must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my creator, detest and spurn me, thy creature, to whom thou art bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous." The creature demanded that Victor listen to his story, and Victor, compelled by something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps guilt, agreed. They took shelter in a hut on the mountain, and there the creature narrated everything that had happened since his abandonment. His confused awakening, his education with the Lacey's, his rejection, and his transformation into a murderer. After telling his story, the creature made a demand. He would leave humanity forever, retreat to the wilds of South America, if Victor would create one thing for him: a female companion, a mate who would not recoil from his appearance because she would be like him. Victor initially refused, horrified at the thought of creating another being like the creature. But the creature's arguments were persuasive. He reasoned that his evil stemmed from his loneliness. With a companion, he would have no need for revenge. He would disappear from human society forever. Finally, worn down by the creature's logic and implicit threats, Victor agreed. Victor traveled to England and then to a remote island in the Orkney archipelago of Scotland, where he began the horrible work of creating a second creature, this time female. But as he worked, doubts consumed him. He feared that the female might prove even more malicious than the first, that she might refuse the pact of isolation, or, worst of all, that together they might reproduce, bringing forth a race of beings whose very existence would render the human species precarious and steeped in terror. So he tore apart the half-finished female creature. The creature's howl of anguish was described as a howl of devilish despair and revenge. When Victor met him afterward, the creature made a chilling promise. "I shall be with you on your wedding night." Victor interpreted this as a threat against his own life. He didn't understand that the creature's revenge would be far more sophisticated, to make Victor feel the same devastating isolation that the creature himself endured. The creature's revenge began immediately. That very night, Victor's closest friend, Henry Clerval, was murdered by strangulation, the creature's method. When Victor landed in Ireland the next day, he was immediately arrested for the murder, and shown Clerval's body with the black finger marks on his throat. Though eventually released due to an alibi, Victor was shattered. He returned to Geneva to marry his adoptive sister Elizabeth, but the creature's threat haunted him. On their wedding night, Victor armed himself, expecting an attack on his person. He left Elizabeth in their room while he patrolled the inn, searching for his creation. It was then that he heard Elizabeth scream. Racing back, he found her murdered, strangled like the others, lying across the bed. The creature had taken everything from Victor, his brother, his friend, his bride, just as Victor had denied him everything. There was one final victim. When Victor returned home and told his father Alphonse about Elizabeth's death, the old man could not withstand the shock. Within days, he died of grief. Now Victor had nothing left but revenge. His entire family destroyed, he devoted himself entirely to hunting down his creation. The pursuit was a strange inversion of their relationship. Now it was Victor who became the obsessed pursuer, and the creature who stayed just ahead. The creature left messages for Victor scratched on trees and rocks, taunting him, urging him onward. Victor's pursuit ended when his dog's sled broke through the ice. He would have died there, but was rescued by a ship, Captain Robert Walton's vessel, trapped in the Arctic ice while searching for the Northwest Passage. It is Walton who frames the entire story, for the novel is told through his letters to his sister. Victor, dying aboard Walton's ship, told the captain his entire story as a warning against the dangers of unchecked ambition. Weakened by exposure, exhaustion, and grief, Victor Frankenstein died. His last words to Walton included a warning: seek happiness and tranquility and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries. After Victor died, Walton left him in the ship's cabin. When Walton returned, he found the creature there leaning over Victor's body, weeping. This scene in the final chapter is one of the most remarkable in Gothic literature, the monster mourning his creator. The creature spoke to Walton, and his words revealed the full tragedy of his existence. He expressed no triumph in his revenge, only despair. The creature explained that he had not been born evil, but made so by suffering and rejection. To Walton's question about what he would do now, the creature announced his intention to die. He would travel to the furthest northern point, build a funeral pyre, and burn himself to ashes. He wanted death not as escape, but as just punishment. With these words, the creature leaped from the ship's cabin window onto an ice raft that had drifted beside the vessel. Walton watched as he was soon borne away by the waves and lost in darkness and distance. Whether the creature actually destroyed himself, Shelley leaves ambiguous. Walton never confirms seeing the funeral pyre. The novel ends with the creature disappearing into the Arctic darkness, his ultimate fate unknown. It's important to understand, the creature was not born a monster. Shelley makes this abundantly clear through the structure of her narrative. The being that Victor abandoned began life with a blank slate, capable of learning, of feeling, of moral reasoning. His first instincts were gentle. His first desires were for companionship and acceptance. But society's treatment of him, based solely on his appearance, created the monster that Victor feared he had made. This is perhaps Shelley's most profound commentary on the nature of good and evil. The creature possessed remarkable abilities. His physical strength far exceeded any normal human's. He could run tirelessly through forests, scale sheer mountains, and survive in conditions that would kill an ordinary person. His intellectual capacity was extraordinary. He learned language, philosophy, and complex moral reasoning in mere months. Yet these gifts became curses, for his strength made him feared, and his intelligence only deepened his anguish as he understood more clearly the magnitude of his isolation. The story of Frankenstein's creature is not simply a tale of horror. It's a tragedy of rejection, a study in how cruelty begets cruelty, and a meditation on what we owe to those we bring into existence. The creature began as a being of potential, capable of great compassion and virtue. Society, including his own creator, transformed him through fear and violence into the very monster they assumed him to be. Mary Shelley, writing this masterpiece when she was barely 20 years old, created in this nameless creature one of literature's most complex and sympathetic figures. He is simultaneously victim and villain, innocent and guilty, pitiable and terrifying. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the creation and early life of Frankenstein's creature. If you found this exploration of Gothic horror enlightening, please like this video and share it with others who appreciate the darker corners of literature. Join me next time as we continue to explore the shadows where literature's most fascinating characters dwell. Until then, keep reading, keep questioning, and remember, monsters are made, not born.